the sobering nature of this is just absolutely, it's inescapable. You know, it's been 60 years since we had a direct assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. Notably and sadly, of course, that happened where you are, the Ambassador Hotel, famously, when Bobby Kennedy, having won that day, not only the California primary, but the South Dakota primary, and then famously from that podium said, now it's on to Chicago. Ironically, that's where the Democrats are going to meet again this year. And of course, he was killed. People forget, however, that also that year, George Wallace was shot as a Democratic presidential candidate. He had already won several primaries in the South. He was paralyzed from the waist down since then. And it's been 60 years. Now, of course, in the 70s, we had the attempt on Gerald Ford's life right here in the state capital of Sacramento by Squeaky Frommman. And then, of course, in the 80s with Ronald Reagan and John Hinckley. But it's been a long, long time. And I think the reason that's important, Mark, is that for people who are, say, under 40 or maybe even 50, this is a brand new day. The notion that a presidential candidate would actually have bullets fired in their direction, regardless of the politics, regardless of the individual. And that, you could tell, shook the nation in a way. Mark, I was at 30,000 feet doing what I do. I was headed back from the Kansas homeland of my family, watching live on Southwest Wi-Fi this event in real time. And I was just, of course, absolutely stunned. You could start hearing little, murmurs around the cabin as people's, alerts were popping up. And then, of course, when I hit the ground in Burbank to change planes to get here in Sacramento, my phone blew up. We had to go live on our 10 and 11 immediately, of course, for CBS, and then iHeart Radio the next morning on a special edition. But, there's a sense of, how do I say this, Mark? There's almost a surreal sense of this, right? I mean, people have talked about this kind of thing, especially related to Trump, and maybe the other direction, given the incendiary, sadly, nature of recent political dialogue. But there was just an almost surreal sense of this, Mark, that I think only now, here on Monday morning, are people really saying, wow, did that really happen over the weekend? And, here we are. All the facts are going to unfold, Mark. And I heard you and Kim talking about it, the security perimeters. You were absolutely right. People kept asking initially, how did this guy get in to the event? Well, he didn't. He was outside of the perimeter area of the event, so there was no magnetometer. He did climb up a roof. Yes, that was witnessed by people themselves who kept, you're right. There's now, Mark, amazingly, there's now real-time video being pieced together that said these shouts from the crowd went for 2 minutes to law enforcement. It wasn't 10 seconds, it was 2 minutes. And, apparently the initial word is, and all the facts will come out, that the folks up on front on the stage, including the authorized sniper behind the stage, could not see him because he was on the other side of the eave of the building.
Right.
And that's the rationale given so far about why he was not spotted earlier by the Secret Service. One last thing, Mark, you rightly pointed out that a lot of people understand that at a presidential event level, everybody is Secret Service. Not so. The Secret Service is actually a small part of the security detail, and law enforcement takes a very large role in a lot of this. And apparently that building had been assigned. There's no aspersions to be cast by me, but simply the facts that local government officials, local law enforcement had been assigned that building. Of course, a lot of people asking the obvious question, why weren't there people on that rooftop to begin with? That'll have to be answered. And there's even questions about whether the sniper themselves who took him out was a local law enforcement sniper, not a Secret Service sniper. So all that yet to be determined, Mark, but that sort of lays the foundation for wherever we want to go politically from here.
Yeah, and so I was saying in the last half hour that the rancor that has informed this entire discourse around presidential politics, it is going to change probably, at least in the short term, because of the shadow of this assassination attempt. Don't you agree?
Oh, we've already seen that, Mark. I mean, President Biden's remarks last night certainly echoed that. The fact that he called Donald Trump, and if you listen to people, I was dialed in 24/7, of course, for the last 47 hours. But the president, when he made his initial remarks from his beach home in Delaware said, I'm going to call Donald. I'm trying right now to get a hold of Donald. He never refers to him as Donald. And by the way, he did reach the former president. They did have a brief, but apparently quite respectful conversation. And then the former first lady and the current first lady spoke yesterday as well. So you can tell there's been a different tone. And then from Trump himself, Mark, he said essentially his 20-page speech they already had written for Thursday, completely shredded. And there are indications from inside the Trump campaign and now from Trump himself that there is, in fact, going to be, and this is going to be, apparently the tone is going to change. I expect it to change not just Thursday night when the president, the nominee for each party typically gives their acceptance speech, but he's going to be nominating his vice president. He's going to be naming his vice presidential nominee shortly, very shortly today. And then the roll calls will begin first for the president and then the vice president. The vice president will speak on Wednesday night, the president on Thursday night. And I would expect by everything we're hearing, Mark, from his campaign, and then alluded to by Trump himself, that he said it's time to unify the country. And to your point, Mark, I mean, because you like me to comment on the politics of it, and this is it. I mean, it would be politically, obviously, incredibly astute and effective to make that the central focus, not an attack on Biden. And of course, the other side's taking the same kind of cues. The Biden team has pulled down its Trump ads this week. There's no campaign events for the sitting president, I don't even know where the Lester Holt interview that was supposed to run today, I don't even know if that's going to happen at this juncture. There hasn't been definitive word to my knowledge about that. So, both sides have, I think, taken a page out of the same playbook that this is not the time to go back on the attack.
So, following that bouncing ball, if neither side goes on the attack, and if Trump hits a tone of unity, which I was saying is so off-brand for him, but will be politically effective, as you just noted, you end up with a kind of stasis. Nothing really changes. And if nothing really changes, it's good for Trump.
Well, you're exactly right, Mark. And it's also good for Biden. Now, why am I saying that? That's totally counterintuitive, Jerry. Well, because in the way we live in news cycles of 24 hours max, let's remember that the pressure was building last week for Biden to get out. I mean, day by day, and up to and including his news conference last Thursday night, which I watched and, of course, commented on extensively, there were still immediately following that news conference. The ranking Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee didn't matter to him. He came out and said, I am asking the president to step down. And day after day, as you know, Mark, last week, the number of Democrats, including a U.S. Democratic senator, the first one came out and said, it's time for the president to step aside. So the pressure on Biden kept building last week. And quite ironically, those calls have come to a screeching halt. I mean, there's already word coming out of the Democratic Party itself that the chances now, in light of the events of the weekend and how this is unfolding, the chances now of Biden stepping aside have dropped dramatically.
It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. I mean, it's sort of the law of unintended consequences, but as you say, everything is so linked in the news cycle, and it was almost a media jihad alongside a lot of the politicians, high-profile politicians and high-profile donors and actors like George Clooney that were dogged in just talking about it. Are you going to step down, sir? It felt like the email thing. It really did. And now, as you say, it's vanished into the ether. Such a great point. So we're hearing J.D. Vance. We're hearing that Rubio and Burgum are being passed over. J.D. Vance, I was saying, is a real flamethrower. He is very good with media. I wonder if you can give me some thoughts. First of all, I'd love to get your take on whether you think it's likely to be him, but if it is him, what that might mean and how you see that ticket coming together.
Right. Just before I get to the VP thing, Mark, I want to put an exclamation point, and you're absolutely right, Mark, again, about that stasis thing. That is the perfect word to describe a presidential campaign where the polls have been stuck slightly in Trump's favor for many, many months. And a new Siena College New York Times poll just released today on Pennsylvania and Virginia showed that indeed Trump, even before this weekend's events, was still holding a 3-point lead in Pennsylvania and only 3 points behind in Virginia, a state that President Biden won by 10 points last time. Yeah. So they wanted to shake up this race. That's what the debate, as you know, 2 weeks ago was supposed to do. It unfortunately for the Biden team went exactly the opposite. It didn't get corrected by his press conference. People were hopeful that maybe things like the Lester Holt interview and so forth were going to do that. But that's why, from Clooney to U.S. senators to members of the House to donors, we're all calling for a change. And by the way, just parenthetically, yes, Kamala Harris was polled in this New York Times Siena College poll as well. She does about 2 points better than Biden in both Virginia and Pennsylvania. Whether that's going to make any difference now in the long run, I think most people are doubting. Now, on to the VP thing. Here's what we know. There's reporting out that there was a major security detail camped outside of J.D. Vance's house this morning, and that they have left with him to go to the airport. So I think right now the handwriting looks like it's on the wall. We'll see. There's nothing formal yet that it's going to be J.D. Vance. Now, why is that significant? Well, he has been, as you point out, Mark, quite effective on the stump, and he's seen as quite an effective communicator and defender of the president and Republican principles, but also its geography. He holds down the Senate seat in Ohio. What now has emerged? Quite ironically, again, given where Saturday's event was, everybody now is agreeing this morning that given the polls, given everything else, Pennsylvania is the linchpin for this election. If Biden-Harris cannot win Pennsylvania, they will almost certainly lose the election. So people are surmising that, media markets, you know how this goes, Mark, they're no respecters of state lines. And so J.D. Vance is well known, especially in Western Pennsylvania, and that could be an additional advantage politically for for a Trump-Vance ticket potentially.
Yeah, it's interesting, is so different in type than like a Mike Pence. First of all, temperament is starkly different, right? Pence is sort of the guy you would cast as president if you were casting some, like a cinema story, where you need to cut to the president occasionally. Pence is very much that way. Didn't carried Trump's water, didn't ask a lot of questions, didn't steal the spotlight, might be the thing I would lead with. And Vance is the opposite. I'm not talking about stealing the spotlight, but certainly comfortable in the spotlight. And so to the degree that he wants an aggressive guy on the stump, and you've just pointed out why it could be so useful to Trump. I mean, just in terms of the states in play. Wow, J.D. Vance might be a very strong choice. The last thing I would say, though, and I'd love to get your comment, I mean, he is a guy who was just as unapologetically coarse in his description of Donald Trump prior to then finding God, and now he's all a Trumpy. Don't you think we'll see some of those sound bites replayed?
Oh, certainly you will. But, everybody, including the man in the moon, at some point or other, we've got so much tape on so many people. How about Marco Rubio, for goodness sake? Yeah. I mean, how about that guy as a VP trick? But there's another important thing, Mark, that we didn't touch on with J.D. Vance, and this has been surfacing just in the last week, and that's the difference in hair color between Pence and Vance. I say that facetiously, but what do I mean? Youthfulness, okay? Youthfulness. Trump himself has been very quietly, but very subtly, making noises in the last week that, age doesn't really matter that much when it comes to it. Why? Because remember, Democrats kept calling for a younger candidate, a more youthful, vigorous candidate, whether it be Harris or somebody else like California's governor or whoever that could fill that role. Vance blunts that significantly, right? I mean, even Burgum is significantly older. So I think that has been another thing that people have not looked at yet. But it's Vance's youthfulness, that will bring down the average age of this ticket if he's the VP significantly.
Well, I really am astounded by the way that things happened over the weekend and that many have rallied around the former president in such a high-profile way. I see Elon Musk coming out almost immediately, endorsing Trump after the shooting, and also pledging a tremendous amount of money to his campaign. It seems as though a lot of institutional money and institutional concerns are now beginning to gravitate toward Trump. I think that might be in large measure, and I guess I'm asking you, because they anticipate that Trump may win this.
Oh, Mark, I think you're exactly right. I mean, you can talk about ideology, you can talk about all kinds of things, political leanings, but the big money, as you say, the institutional money, these players, this is not their first rodeo. They want to be with the winner. They want to be with the one who's going to be appointing cabinet secretaries and, department deputy directors who are going to make big decisions on regulations and other things. I mean, that's just the reality of it. People on both sides are well aware of this. There's also another figure whose name hasn't come up that I think, two, they're going to be very significant this week, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Neither one of them initially were going to be invited to the convention, let alone speak at it. Now both are coming. Both will speak. That, too, especially Haley, obviously. And, of course, last week she released her delegates and said, I'd like you to go ahead and, put out your vote for the former president. Those two voices, along with Trump, along with Vance, to me, are going to be the big four that we're going to be watching this week. And if they come out in a unified fashion and have this sense of we need to come together, not just as a party, but as a nation, that's going to change the tone of this election significantly.
I agree. Very powerful message. Gary Dietrich from CBS Television and iHeart Radio. Love our time together. Thank you, pal. You always put things in a great framework. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Mark. Have a great show today.
All right, Gary Dietrich. Talk next week. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.